Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Privatization, and today we're going to jump into a dev diary for Victoria 3 for the upcoming Sphere of Influence update that will be released on the 6th of May, and today is a special day because, well, I have basically nothing negative to say about the content here. We're going to explore so much when it comes to the rework of the economy, of how investing works, and indeed how ownership works in general. There is so much exciting stuff in here and so few, if any, edge cases that I can point out already that, would make this into a weak system. I am just excited. I think in the form that we are seeing here already in this dev diary, this rework is going to be a massive net positive, and not just that, it also lays the groundwork for the future, and that future is very bright. Let's take a look at what they're talking about here. Today we're going to be exploring a revision of the building ownership system and what it allows us to do. Foreign investment, a much requested feature which makes its debut in 1.7. This is indeed something that we have waited for such a long time now, and it comes now in a much more specific and much more interesting way than it ultimately wasn't in Victoria 2. Don't get me wrong, I think Victoria 2's loan system was quite interesting in particular, and keep that in mind, the system around somebody going bankrupt, defaulting on the loans and giving you a casus belli, indeed a war goal to force them to pay their debts. This kind of stuff was really interesting in Victoria 2, and it was incredibly sad to not see it implemented. But the way it has now been implemented is absolutely amazing in my eyes. Let's take a look at ownership types. So just in general, who can own things, how do they own it, and how exactly does all of that work? Let's assume for a second that it is 1836. In Bavaria, a proud member of the Zollverein power block, all buildings are owned by the state or the workers themselves. Capitalists, aristocrats, and clergymen no longer work in these buildings, and most of the shopkeepers no longer work in production buildings directly. In addition, the ownership production methods have been removed. Instead, ownership works on a per-level basis, allowing a mixed ownership structure in the same building. This right here is absolutely groundbreaking. It is really good because of the implications. Instead of each individual building having a particular production method that determines who is the ownership class and indeed who receives the dividends to which degree, we are looking at something that is now centralized. The description of Bavaria in 1836 is basically any country or most countries before industrialization occurs. Buildings are either directly maintained by the state itself, so by the aristocracy that is in control of the state power, or indeed by the workers directly. This is the small-scale industry before big machines and so on came to be. For example, it would be the Silesian weavers. These would be shopkeepers owning their own businesses, owning their very small manufactories, and then indeed owning the levels in-game. We can see this right here. This is a logging camp, and this logging camp actually is split between 3 different owners. First of all, the logging camp owns itself, so that is basically the workers of the logging camp. They're getting some dividends, and yeah, that will make them relatively wealthy. Then we have one level owned by a financial district and one level owned by manor houses. And this right here already gives you a glimpse of how great the system will be. At the start of the game, you will largely have people own their very own location, making some dividends. But as soon as a financial district or a manor house owns more and more of these districts, you're looking at a situation where this money that previously was paid out to the bulk of the workforce in the building all of a sudden goes to just a tiny few. So this rework inherently makes it so that wealth concentration, wealth extraction from the colonies, other markets, and so on, all of a sudden will be a thing. Now let's explore this a bit further. In worker-owned buildings, employees work for themselves basically. So any dividends they may accumulate, they split amongst themselves. This is the default at game start for many countries, not all of them though, and is a state which you can more or less return to at a later stage of the game with the enactment of cooperative ownership, which will expropriate your privately owned buildings over time. One major exception from the ownership situation at game start are subsistence farms, which are owned by a new building we are introducing, manor houses. The rich people will now lounge around in luxury instead of slumming it with the common folks in less refined taste buildings. We wouldn't want their shoes to be dirtied on a subsistence farm. Manor houses are able to own levels of other buildings. In our case, at game start, all the levels of subsistence farms in their own states. They pay their wages and dividends by collecting dividends from the building they own and distributing them among their employees. What type and how many employees they have is determined by a limited set of PMs. We can also in fact see this right here. This is the aforementioned manor house in Franconia. We can see the ownership production method being privately owned, which gives you a base level of aristocrats owning, or rather participating in this building, and then we have a slight deviation we can do, either by having clergy oversight, which makes it so that there will be clergymen, or by having exclusive aristocratic management. I wonder what the exact differences there will be. But the big lesson here is that no longer is it even necessary that the owner lives in the same state, works in the same building, is in the very same location at all, not even in the same country. This can now be handled via manor houses, financial districts, and so on, owning stuff. This is super exciting. Alright, but then where do shopkeepers and capitalists work? They work in the new financial district buildings, which behave pretty much like the manor houses. They too have different employment PMs, can own levels of other buildings, and pay their employees by collecting dividends from owned building levels. Both new buildings expand automatically, depending on how many levels they own. This is somewhat reminiscent of how trade centers already expand based on whether they own a trade route or not. If a new level of a privately owned factory is created, a corresponding new level of a financial district is also generated. All building levels that you construct are country-owned. Under certain laws, this status can change soon after they are finished constructing. Country-owned buildings come with reduced economy of scale bonuses and a bureaucracy cost for each level you own. But in return, they can provide additional income based on the building's dividends, which partially get transferred to your treasury. Not all buildings can be of any ownership type, of course. For example, barracks or government administrations will always be country-owned. This paragraph actually mentions something that worried me when it came to this rework. I was wondering, okay, what is going to stop me from simply owning all my building levels? Of course, you can do this in communism, in a command economy. This is definitely something that ought to be and must be viable, but at the same time, in general, I shouldn't just be able to, buy people out and then go from there. And the lesson here basically is, of course, that, well, there is a reduced economy of scales, and of course the bureaucracy cost goes up as well. Bureaucracy costs now actually being involved in you owning building levels. That is really awesome news, because it gives you a big incentive to have all these capitalists, making it harder for you to, in the end, get rid of them once you go communist. That means that the optimal gameplay is probably somewhere in between. You want to have some capitalists, some state-owned stuff, and, well, some locally owned stuff as well. If we sum it up, then there are essentially three types of ownership for any building level: worker-owned, privately owned, and country-owned. Privately owned, of course, being split, as mentioned, between financial districts and manor houses. In general, this is huge. But let's explore what happens if you don't have any financial districts at all and want to get some new ones. Primarily, this will occur with this button right here. If you have a building that you own, so that is state-owned, you can toggle privatization. This will allow investors to buy furniture manufacturing levels from Bavaria for 450,000 per level. So that is a serious cash injection. This will make it possible for your pops to acquire them. Depending on the type of building you're privatizing, they usually get bought either by aristocrats or capitalists using the investment pool's funds. Now, if you do not have any capitalists in your country yet, other pops may step up though, using the investment pool's funds to buy a building you put up for sale and become capitalists in the process, which in turn leads to, of course, the first financial district appearing. The money will be transferred from the investment pool to your country's treasury once that happens. The cost of buying a level is determined by its construction cost and is modified by most of the economic system laws. These laws also affect the efficiency of these transactions, meaning how much money is lost as overhead and how much money is being reinvested into the investment pool or the treasury. One particularly interesting law is laissez-faire, which upon enactment forces all your country-owned buildings to be put up for sale and will automatically do so for every new building level you construct. Similarly, enactment of other laws like cooperative ownership and command economy does not immediately change the ownership of all buildings, but rather can start a process that can convert your economy over time. As I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, okay, so we're looking now at a situation where the basic economy laws will feel even more different than they already do, compared to, for example, laissez-faire and, anything going on with command economy and co-op ownership. Not just that, they will now have a different pacing of transitioning into each other, meaning you can't just change the law, flip the switch, and all of a sudden everything is a co-op owned business. I absolutely adore this. We are also now looking at a situation where we now have a direct transfer from the investment pool to us if we build something up and then privatize it, which, yeah, I mean, that is just amazing. In the image right there, we can see laissez-faire. You can see indeed that it disallows downsizing non-government buildings as always, but it also now disables nationalization and forces privatization. Steps that make it so that laissez-faire will now be even more distinct in, the comparison between all the other economy laws. What I am super curious about is, of course, what the kind of transaction loss is. So let's say the investment pool pays 450k. When do I get 400k? When do I get close to the entire benefit out of it? Is it maybe related to our bureaucratic efficiency as well? Who the hell knows? But I'm going to be honest with you. This is now incredibly fluid. I can sell certain levels. I can buy them back. I can ensure that vital industries are in my hands, giving me benefits. For example, I can monopolize the liquor production if I am Russia because I know that this will be incredibly profitable. The idea here is clearly incredibly great, and normally is now the part where I say, oh, but you know what, I'm thinking of these 15 edge cases and they seem very bad to me. I can't say that here at all. What we are seeing here is something I'm really glad about. I think the implementation here seems very good, and it also works, of course, for your own market, for your own country, for your vassals, for foreign markets. It works for your pops, it works for you, it works for individual laws, and it adds depth everywhere. Obviously, there's also a greater perspective here, but the devs mentioned that one at the end of the dev diary themselves, so let's get to that when we come to it. For the time being, let's learn about the details of investment. The existing logic for how the private investment pool works remains similar to before, so different pop types still have different priorities, and they will look at factors like estimated productivity, available workforce, etc. When a building is about to be constructed by private investment, we randomly determine who is building it, favoring already existing financial districts and manor houses over creating new ones. Obviously, this is a certain degree of abstraction, but you have to do this both for performance and, well, I don't think it would actually matter if it was this particular investor doing it when it comes to the gameplay impact of it. This does mean that when something is being built from the investment pool, whatever building is likely to want this building, so for example, the manor houses want of course agricultural buildings, and then the financial districts want more urban buildings, it gets assigned, and you normally get it assigned to an already existing level of financial district / of course the manor houses. This means you will very naturally get a massive wealth concentration. It's very clear that Berlin, for example, starts with, well, more financial districts than Silesia. So then it becomes very obvious who will be building those new furniture, well, those new clothing factories. It is, of course, the actual financial district in Berlin, sucking the dividends away from the weavers of Silesia. I keep coming back to this example because in the past this most certainly wasn't really viable. Local price made it so that it became more and more viable for basically differences in wealth and such to occur. But this right here, the investment and the way it selects who owns things, yeah, we're going way deeper into that direction and I could not be happier for it. Now, a really interesting tidbit is the following. In a worker-owned economy, the private investment pool will continue to function, but they will only expand their own buildings, not create new ones. That kind of makes sense because there would be a theoretical market between these co-op buildings right there, which means the workers themselves invest in themselves, and of course you as the state can then create new industries as well, making this a very different investment pool behavior yet again. These differences between the investment pool in different economies, I think, is a much needed change so that you get a different feeling no matter what you're playing. An important fact with this system is that investments do not need to be local. As already mentioned, a financial district or manor house can invest in any of your country's states. This system will create a flow of money from the colonies to your homelands, a stronger centralization of wealth and power, and it will end the status of colonies pops making more money than your pops at home. God bless America. That is all I can say. We are looking at what for me personally will easily be the best patch going forward. Fingers crossed that it will work out of the box and not require 15 hotfixes. This concept right here is so incredibly solid because this will add so much more nuance. I basically can't contain my excitement. Quite frankly, I have so many issues with power blocks, and we're gonna see about that next week when basically Power Block 2.0, the dev diary, is coming out. But for this one right here, it really feels like they nailed it. All of a sudden, ownership will no longer be local. All of a sudden, ownership will be preferred to actually be concentrated. And all of a sudden, we are extracting wealth like crazy. It also can happen, by the way, that foreign countries can invest into your country. You can see this right here. Prussia owns 26%, so 4 levels of the furniture manufactories in Franconia. That means that 638 pounds of the dividends earned in this building are sent to Berlin directly, extracted from our pops, extracted from potentially our actual nation. Now, of course, I'm describing this as wealth extraction, but think about it this way: if I didn't have the money to provide these jobs, if I couldn't have built these levels, then this is a massive, massive plus. Which brings us to the next topic of this dev diary, and that is indeed foreign investment. There are a few ways to acquire foreign investment rights. First of all, overlords can always invest in their subjects. This is part of the free 1.7 update and will allow you to do foreign investment where it matters the most, even if you do not own sphere of influence. Very nice to see that for sure. Foreign investment will basically be in, but it will be market specific. It will be rather specific to your empire, compared to being something that you can do all over the world. Then there are 3 diplomatic pacts which you can use if you have bought the expansion. There will be mutual investment rights, which allows both countries to invest in each other. This definitely sounds like an equal partnership. And then one directional investment rights in either direction. So you either demand to be allowed to invest in their country or offer another country to invest in yours. You can also see that there is one slot here that is redacted, and we shall see the effects on the 11th of April, is what the developers are saying. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, it says on the 11th of April we are going to be talking about lobbies. So I assume this might be a diplomatic pact where I open a lobby in a different country. I wonder whether it is essentially a slightly hostile pact. I wonder how that works in general, whether I have to agree and whether it can only be a positive lobby. But we're going to learn about this more in about 2 weeks. Let's continue with foreign investment. There's also a power block principal group that deals with foreign investment, which on tier 3 has the consequence of being able to invest in any member country, whether they want it or not. No matter how you get the investment rights, you and also your pops will be able to invest in the target country. Private investment does consider foreign states as potential targets for their expansions, allowing them to build profitable buildings more easily. This is really good news because when this was announced, I was in the Discord arguing, talking about, hey, what can we expect here? What will this likely look like? And back then, I had the impression that only countries can invest. But all of a sudden, boom, there you go. There's no issue whatsoever. Your pops will be investing, your pops will be throwing money at third-party countries, and of course, be very, very angry if that should be expropriated, which is now going to be the next topic. We know that we can invest. There's also foreign investment. Let's talk about nationalization, so taking things back. Nationalization allows you to take control of foreign assets in your country. You cannot nationalize other countries' assets as long as they possess foreign investment rights in your country, so you have to first abandon that pact. Once that is no longer the case, for example, if Bavaria left the Zollverein power block, you can peacefully nationalize their building levels in your country. For that, you need to pay a sum of money from your treasury. Similarly to privatization, the sum is determined by the construction costs plus modifiers from laws. You will also be able to nationalize your own pops building levels, both worker-owned and privately owned, if you'd like to take ownership. Nationalization is not seen positively by the affected pops, of course, and will radicalize them. Even if you pay them, at some point this is essentially eminent domain. This is you, for example, declaring an industry and national interest. And yes, even if you pay them, hey, that might make them slightly less mad, but it will still make them mad, because there could have been more profit to be had if you hadn't nationalized this, at least for them. What we can see right here is the idea of nationalizing furniture manufactories. We can nationalize 9 out of 18 levels for £5.4 million. That is a lot of money. If you've played this game, then you will know that that is a lot of money for just 9 levels. And I'm really, really happy to see it. Nationalizing a core industry should be a process. It should be difficult, it should be arduous, and it should be costly. But it should be worth it. Once you have it, you are in full control, you are directly collecting the dividends, and you are safe from foreign nation meddling, and most importantly, from the wealth being extracted. You can see that this will make people mad that own this, of course, and you can change the specific levels of nationalization as well, which means if you don't have the money to do 9 levels, let's just do 1 or maybe 2. Now let's assume though for just 1 second, what happens if the Bavarian coffers are empty, yet you still want to take over that juicy productive furniture manufacturing that is owned by Prussia? I mean, well, in this case it isn't. It is owned by the workforce and a financial district in Ile-de-France, but of course the principle holds true. Let's take a look at this right here. If you uncheck give monetary compensation, we can very clearly see that a ton more pops will absolutely be angry at you. They will hate you for this because, yeah, you just stole their property in their eyes. and this of course gets more intense if there is a country involved. You can demand nationalization of a country's assets in your country. If they accept, their building levels ownership changes to your country. If they don't, you can try and enforce it as a war goal. If you're successful, you will also remove their foreign investment rights for your country in addition to taking control of their buildings in your country. Okay, so this one is the one relatively critical opinion that I have on this, but I'm kind of mellowed out on this. I thought about this, I read this, and then I sat down and considered all the options. Well, let me explain. In Victoria 2, when it comes to foreign investment, it was a lot more vague. There, of course, you were also investing in particular buildings and such, but in general, most of the time when people interacted with the loan system, it was just AI countries defaulting on the loans. When an AI country did that, they would no longer pay you back and no longer pay your pops back and so on, but it wouldn't trigger a diplomatic play immediately, or well, a war. Instead, it would just give a war goal to the nation that, owned part of that debt. This is kind of what I would prefer here, right? Because the idea would be, okay, I can nationalize this and you have to come to me if you dare to take my stuff back. That's not the case. If you want to nationalize it without compensation, you have to basically push them either through with a demand, so basically you start a diplomatic play and they just give in, or you full on go to war. Now, that's a bit far, but I will say that I don't actually see too many scenarios where you will be doing this. In general, at least that is what I would guess, is that normally you and the AI will prefer simply to purchase these building levels, because that is, even historically, how most of these actually went. The only exceptions, of course, would be stuff like you're an unrecognized nation, you used Great Britain to build you up, and the investment is just so big in your country that you can't buy any of that back. In that case, you would have to go to war. Let's hope that you just need to stay unoccupied, right? So that you can get rid of that and actually win in that war. The other option, of course, are communist countries where it might be a bit iffy if you, let's say, have like 6 or 7 different countries invested in your country and you have to go one by one and make sure that they are stopped investing in your country. Either way, whether this will be, a bit burdensome, a bit clunky, I don't think there will be too many circumstances where it doesn't make sense that there will be a war breaking out, because this is not exactly you defaulting on loans, this is you taking their property away directly. In that context, I will say that I just hope that the kind of math behind it makes sense, right? Maybe it is something that you can only do if you are militarily superior. Maybe it should be something where you can promise them a favor. Hey, listen, I'm gonna take this property, but I owe you, and you can pull me, for example, into your power block, that kind of stuff. What exactly it will look like, no idea. In general, I am tentatively more in favor of this being something that requires the action of the person that just lost property. But hey, at the end of the day, it is what it is. We're going to see how this implementation goes. I don't think it's going to be too big of a hurdle, at least not after considering it quite a bit. So in short, even with this, I am totally on board. This sounds amazing to me. Let's move on to something that, well, sounds great, but doesn't really need that much conversation around it. This is the building registry. To visualize all these new mechanics, we're introducing the building registry, which allows you a customizable look at your country's situation. This doesn't really need that much input. You can see right here, it effectively works like the census data that we have, and the census data is so amazing. In a similar vein here, we also get a ton of different things that we can utilize to sort our population through. So yeah, in short, this sounds great, it looks great, we can investigate exactly what is going on. For example, we can even just see which buildings are owned by pops and which are currently not hiring but not fully employed, and so on. There is just so much going on there. Whenever they're adding these kind of info sheets, where you just have the entire screen with information, I will always be in favor of it. And that actually brings us very, very close to the end of this dev diary. There are just 2 more things that ought to be discussed and that we will, of course, discuss. The first one is something that is very clear to me and has been clear to me ever since 1.2, when they introduced autonomous investment. The directly controlled investment pool game rule will be gone. It will not be in 1.7 and it will never come back. I know of a couple of people, and this is the one time where I understand it, that are using it entirely because there are sometimes some buggy behavior of the investment pool, which, just get rid of that, please. If you could fix those bugs, that would be amazing. But in general, I just personally think that this game rule was never a good idea. I understand that you want to accommodate people that like playing that way, basically as a planned economy the whole time, but that was very clearly not the way the game was going. Maintaining game rules is a very, 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 very costly endeavor, and in this case, it just goes directly counter to the very design of how this works. So Yeah, you're not gonna hear me cry about this. But the outlook seems absolutely incredible. Let's talk about what they can do now that this system will be in. The main thing here is affecting companies. The way we have reworked ownership allows us to create company headquarters buildings, which can then own specific building levels of industries they care about, determining its profitability from and providing their throughput bonuses only to these. While we cannot provide a concrete timeline for that change at this point, it is something we would like to tackle for one of our next 3 updates. I need companies to become actors. I need companies to do their own stuff. I want to take the property of Standard Oil away if I am Iran, okay? I want to do all of these things, and I think they would be an amazing addition, although there would be a bit of a wider rework for companies, right? Even internally, I would like it if there were several companies in the same field competing, so instead of me selecting them, I would like it if they just basically built themselves up and could even purchase each other. That would be perfect for me. I don't think they're gonna go this far, or at least not from this one paragraph right here, but the base idea of companies of course owning levels and then giving their bonuses to these levels exactly, I mean, that's just a really great piece. What we are getting is a complete rework in how wealth is distributed, segmented, and then extracted, and what that means for the political gameplay, for the happiness of the population, what that means for reforming into different and new economic systems, what it means for keeping other countries under our heel. I think there is so much goodness in this. I basically have nothing negative to say about it. Now, the next dev diary will be about subject interactions, which I actually thought next would be power blocks, but that is the week after. So subject interactions comes next week, and then on the 11th of April is lobbies and more on power blocks when it comes to the topic of what we will cover here on the channel. Now, next week I will see you here back on the channel to talk about subject interactions. I'm quite excited for that one. So far it looks very eerily similar to Hearts of Iron 4, which is not a negative. We'll see what exactly it looks like. And then on the 11th of April, lobbies and more on power blocks, at which point I will talk about power blocks extensively and how and why I feel about them the way I do. Folks, let me know what you think about this. If you can see edge cases that I'm overlooking, if you're not as excited for this as I am, then let me know. And if you are using direct investment as a game rule, then, well, you know, my condolences. Folks, I will leave it right here, and I'll see you later. Alligator.